This is part 2 of a series exploring Guts' character design and how this helps strengthen the narrative of Berserk. If you haven't seen part 1, I would advise you to do so before watching further. The link is in the description. I'd just like to apologise for the armoured arm error in the first part. So many of you informed me that this has actual historic context, and that since most people are right-handed, this is where strikes would be aimed at, so it would make sense for this to be protected in relation to their fighting arm. I feel silly that I didn't research in depth enough to pick up on this, and only related it to the arm loss in the eclipse. I'll strive to do better for this in the future, and thanks to all of those who pointed it out, it really does help. And so here we are, into the eclipse, in which Guts' defining character traits take their origin. Already being injured from the prior fight with Wild, Guts is already dressed in bandages whilst going into the eclipse. It's a small detail, but I like how it's showing Guts' vulnerability going into this hopeless situation. Already injured just after facing one apostle, now how will he fare surrounded by many? This also marks the first time that Guts gets his iconic brand of sacrifice marked on his neck. The visual of how this is distributed between the hawks is something that I've always enjoyed. Void displays the brand in a large overbearing manner as it rains down on the hawks, branding each of them. It marks the cruel fate for Guts and the hawks. When we first see the brand in the Black Swordsman arc, we are unaware of its origin, aside from the fact that it attracts apostles to Guts, and we assumed it was isolated just to himself. But now, in this larger context, Guts is marked for life with a symbol which is a reminder of the massacre of those closest to him, and he has to carry the burden for all of his fallen hawks, not just himself. The positioning of the neck doesn't really mean much, as all of the hawks get the brand positioned on different parts of their body, but it provides some cool visuals when we see it bleed in many panels throughout the series, and because it's on his neck, it also means that it's always clearly visible, as a constant visual reminder to the reader of what this horrible mark represents, compared to someone like Casca's, which is positioned on her breast, which is usually covered up. As the eclipse unfolds, various apostles restrain Casca to perform violating acts. As Guts runs over in an attempt to stop this, Borkov chomps down on his arm, marking the first in a string of events which contributes to Guts becoming the Black Swordsman we see in the beginning of the series. As Femto is born, he performs one last power play to Guts, the rape of Casca. Guts, fueled with rage, cuts off his own arm in an attempt to kill Griffith in this moment. This is more so tied to another of Guts' injuries we'll see very shortly, but for his arm to be lost in such a horrific way provides new context to the readers, which we simply didn't have in the Black Swordsman arc. It's less about the injury itself and more so the situation in which led to it. The loss of the arm was self-inflicted, and in that parcel of time, Guts was willing to lose it to stop Griffith from performing this disgusting act. Now don't get me wrong, the loss of the arm is disgusting and grotesque, but the trauma of why this arm was cut off, because of the events unfolding in front of Guts' very eyes, is something much more powerful that we associate with this injury. However, this isn't the end of it, as when Guts frees himself after slicing off his left arm, he is immediately pinned down by apostles, and his right eye is lost. Guts losing his right eye has a lot more weight than his arm. I mean, not to compare two horrific acts to each other directly, but the way Miura highlights the loss of the eye entirely through visuals is masterfully done. The last thing that his right eye witnesses is Femto performing the rape of Casca, as blood obscures his vision from one panel to the next, until the last thing he sees is Casca lying down defeated after the horrific abuse. This being the last thing seared into Guts' right eye is something which is addressed time and time again throughout the manga, but Miura effectively conveyed it here without any dialogue, which helps cement him as a master of the medium. Another example of this is when Guts wakes up in Godo's cave after the eclipse and witnesses Casca in her new insane state. He starts crying, but instead of tears, blood is streaming down from his face, from the bandaged up eye. It's very subtle, but demonstrates beautifully the emotional turmoil Guts is going through without any dialogue, whilst tying his new injuries into this. Up next is perhaps one of my favourite weapon origins ever, how the Dragon Slayer came to be. I love how this weapon is canonically introduced. No fanfare at all, with Ricker just stumbling into it in Godo's cache. I love that Miura specifically chose Ricker to highlight the weapon. Having the youngest of the Hawks looking up at such a weapon demonstrates the scale of how ridiculously huge that the sword is, which puts into context of Guts' strength and resolve to wield such a weapon. Miura grants us a backstory of how the weapon came to be through Godo. The sword was made as a form of protest, as the king requested a sword so large enough to be able to kill a dragon, which was taken literally by the blacksmith, as he was sick by doing work for nobles. Make them refined, make them elegant. Godo saw swords as tools. They should do as they were described, and so that's how he made the Dragon Slayer. However, he saw it as a failure because it lost the essence of the philosophy of how he built his weapons. It wasn't an effective tool because no known human would be able to handle such a weapon. Of course, such a sword could kill a dragon, if they existed, but dragons are dragons because man can't beat them. But if only a man existed, but more on that later. I've already spoken about the Black Swordsman armor extensively in the last part, so I don't want to repeat myself too much here, but I do like how Miura gives context to the aspects of the design when it's canonically introduced here compared to the Black Swordsman arc. An example of this is Guts using knives as a part of his combat arsenal due to Judo showing him the ropes long ago, as although it isn't particularly his style, it may be something that he uses in the future. I really enjoy that this gives something as so simple as throwing knives a whole new meaning based on what we know now compared to the Black Swordsman arc, where knives are something inherently tied to Judo, so whenever Guts uses them, he's almost paying tribute to the memory of his comrade, although the method of his memory is misguided by vengeful thoughts, but perhaps that's for another video. Even the colour of the armour is brought attention to by Erica, in which Guts responds the reason for the black armour is because his enemies are shrouded in darkness, so he will be too. There's not much to dive into here, but black is a good reflection of Guts' mental state from the eclipse prior, and works hand in hand with the narrative that Black Swordsman Guts almost acts as demonic as the foes he's slaying in his revenge-fueled quest. We are then introduced to Guts' metal arm. Guts comments that it's heavy, alluding to the fact that there's a cannon inside of a metal arm that he is unaware of until his fight with the Boar Apostle. It's also enjoyable to see a less experienced Black Swordsman use this weaponry for the first time. Guts' shoulder pops out of joint when he first uses the cannon, due to an overbearing amount of gunpowder. It's a nice starting point where we see this established character design of the Black Swordsman wasn't always this experience, and that he refined his use of the weaponry and his new toolset over time based on prior experience. Now, back to the Dragon Slayer. The way that Guts is introduced to this weapon is one of my favourite scenes in Berserk. A quick glance of it in Godo's weapon stash, then smash cut to Guts using it to kill the Boar Apostle over the series of the next pages. Look at how Miura uses paneling here to gauge the reactions of everyone witnessing this weapon being used for the first time. He spends 2 to 3 pages establishing reaction shots from the Apostle itself, Godo, Rickert, and Erica, and then ending it with a gruesome double page spread of Guts delivering the final blow. A sword is just a tool for doing the job which was prescribed after all. If no man would be physically able to wield the Dragon Slayer, then what does this make Guts? He even comments that this weapon is much more suited to his fight. Erica exclaims that Guts looks scary, and we are left with this. A dragon is a dragon because humans can't beat them. So what is a man who can beat dragons? This sequence completes Guts' transformation into the Black Swordsman perfectly. His character design transformation into this revenge-fueled man, compared to his more classical design from Golden Age, is given so much love and care by Miura. Each part of the design, from his weaponry to the colour of the armour, informs Guts' mental state at the time. Miura didn't have to put this much content and backstory between each individual piece of a character design, but he did. Whenever the reader sees Black Swordsman Guts, they are reminded of how this dark design reflects his equally dark mental state. Wow, That section was long, but now we are on to the long and awaited Berserker armor. It's set up by Flora and Skull Knight, which provides some interesting history of the armor before Guts himself ever even sees it. We, as the reader, can pick up on some contextual clues which inform the mystical, almost ancient origin of the armor. Flora comments that the armor is nostalgic, while Skull Knight comments on how dangerous such an armor is. We can grasp from this short dialogue exchange that both Flora and Skull Knight have history with each other and the armor, and that even if Skull Knight, who's been presented as an infallible ultra badass up until this point, is exclaiming how dangerous such an armor is, then what does this mean for his next wielder? Flora comments that the armor is necessary for Guts' journey. We as a reader can interpret this as, although Guts has taken up a new mantle from his Black Swordsman persona from Revenge Fuel to a protector of Casca, he is going to have to continue to essentially destroy himself to accomplish his new goals, which will tie into his later character design in the Berserker armor. We get our first good look at the armor when Flora communicates to Shurike to bring the armor to Guts. The armor is a lot more durable in design compared to the Black Swordsman armor, with increased plating to the whole body, leaving almost nothing exposed. It also inherits a more zigzaggy, spiky design. It looks a lot more mystical / magical compared to previous armors that Guts has worn, which is extremely fitting since he is going to need to draw from these sources as he tackles increasingly harder foes, and the armor reflects this. Which is fitting, giving Shurike's explanation that the armor is a magical fetish created by dwarfs, so it's nice that their otherworldly design matches its origin. The helmet in its first appearance dons that of a skull, which we later learn that the helmet reflects the inner turmoil and darkness of the owner. As the previous owner was Skull Knight, this matches the first helmet design. The helmet quickly transforms to match Guts' inner turmoil, which is the Beast of Darkness. The imagery that Miura incorporates of the skull helmet slowly enveloping Guts and transforming into the Beast of Darkness is masterfully done. It's presented as consumption. The armor isn't simply changing around Guts, it's eating him alive and completing his transformation. And this is also supported by many later panels in the series. The Beast helmet in tandem with the otherworldly spike design of the armor also gives Guts his mental state a physical beastly form. Guts looks like a metallic beast here, and Miura conveys this visually throughout the series, throughout many covers and panels, such as this famous one from the Volume 28 cover. The way that Guts' weaponry adapts whilst in this form is a good visual contrast to how he fought as the Black Swordsman. The cannon arm is now part of the armor itself, revealing from the inside of his hand. I really enjoy this detail in the character design. It's almost as if both the weaponry of Guts and the armor itself have become one, which completes the beast allegory. Guts' weaponry are no longer separated but a part of him when he dons this armor. He becomes a monster himself, almost forming a symbiotic relationship with the armor, much like Venom in Spider-Man. The white streak in his hair that Guts gets from the armor is a striking visual because it stays with him for the rest of the series, that the stress was so great that it has physically changed his appearance and has slowly but surely taken toll on his body, which the reader is reminded of whenever they see the streak of white. Guts giving into his temptations and becoming a beast is a big focal point of what the Berserker armor represents. Even when he gains control of his senses later on in the series, thanks to Shurike, the imagery of the exposed face within the helmet is drawing parallels to Femto. Not that these two are the same at all, but Miura is clearly highlighting similarities between the two, that Guts is slowly losing himself the more he uses the cursed armor, just like Femto gave up his humanity in the eclipse. I'll just leave these two panels here for you guys to compare. The Berserker armor, whilst a striking design, also marks a sad downfall for Guts in both his physical and mental health. The change in character design from Guts in the Golden Age to now is a sad sight to see, and it's conveyed almost entirely visually, which helps strengthen the story in Berserk. I'm going to end the video with this. Look at Guts in the Golden Age, triumphant looking, at his physical peak and full of life. Now look at Guts here after donning the Berserker armor. He has lost a lot of weight, covered in scars, and looking physically and maybe even mentally defeated. This is purely the strength of Miura's work. Just looking at these two pictures, a reader can figure out Guts' mentally and physically taxing journey, and this is told with no dialogue, and to do this purely through character design is a testament to how much Miura is a master of this craft. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you all next time.